Good morning and welcome, like Jennifer Phillips said. We appreciate all of you being here. This is just the first one that you're getting to witness of a series of training programs for our new grantees, and I'm going to pass it on to Patrick Campbell.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and a special welcome to all of our navigators and intermediaries who joined us. My name is Patrick Campbell, and I'm with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, Office of Employment and Training. I'm the Program Development Division Manager for the state of Illinois. I'm also pleased to introduce the presenters of today's meeting. If each presenter could introduce themselves and their organization, it'll give the audience a chance to better recognize who is speaking. So with that, we can start with Morgan.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Morgan Diamond, and I'm the Midwest Program Manager at Young Invincibles, which is a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring young adults have economic mobility and access to the political process. We work really closely with all of the folks on the call today and really are passionate about making sure apprenticeships are available to everyone, including young adults and those with employment barriers.
Good morning. My name
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. Just to say that I'm Jennifer Foyle, Northern Illinois University. Most of you know me. The reason you hear so much from me is because we have an intergovernmental agreement with DCEO, and I work full-time to help them expand apprenticeship.
And I'm Jim Nelson. I'm Vice President of the Illinois Manufacturers Association. We're the oldest and among the largest manufacturer associations in the country. We were founded in 1893. I've been involved with education and workforce policy, and the blend of a dual system approach for that's used in apprenticeship is right up the alley and really does make a difference, particularly in the manufacturing sector.
Hello, everybody. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of Revolution Workshop. Revolution Workshop is a pre-apprenticeship construction training program located on the west side of the city of Chicago. We offer pre-apprenticeship training for the underserved communities, mainly in the south and west sides of the city of Chicago. And the whole goal is to have folks achieve financial independence by building up their skills, hope, and resilience. Personally, I've been serving on the apprenticeship committee for, I think it's about 4 years now. And so glad to be here this morning to kind of share the thoughts and the hard work of a lot of my colleagues on this call.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Apprenticeship and Workforce Solutions at City Colleges of Chicago. City Colleges is a 7 independently accredited college system in the city of Chicago with about 75,000 students. We are working to stand up apprenticeship programs in non-traditional sectors, including areas like healthcare, transportation, information technology, and business. I've been working in this role for 2 years, and prior to that, was working on apprenticeships specifically in insurance while I was a dean at Harold Washington. We're happy to contribute to this effort. We currently are running about 25 different apprenticeship programs right now, and we are hoping to expand our work to include more of our students in the apprenticeship opportunities. I've also been a part of the Workforce Innovation Board Apprenticeship Committee for the past 4 years as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much. It's so wonderful to have a great group of real content experts to present on the different aspects of apprenticeships. Illinois recognizes that utilizing apprenticeship as a workforce strategy for business and a career pathway for individuals aligns the governor's vision as well as the plans required for state education and workforce entities. These include the following: Governor Pritzker's Executive Order 2019-03, the Illinois Economic Plan, the Illinois Unified State Plan, the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and Perkins 5. Most of these can be found through links on Illinois WorkNet and are great resources to better understand Illinois' vision. The Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, also known as IWIB, established the Apprenticeship Committee in 2016. The committee recognized that apprenticeships are a promising solution for businesses to find and tap into undiscovered talent, all branded under the name of Apprenticeship Illinois. This volunteer committee includes leaders representing all key apprenticeship stakeholders. The committee's charge is to advise the IWIB on apprenticeship and to oversee the implementation of a comprehensive statewide plan with the following goals: to fully integrate apprenticeship into state workforce development, education, and economic development strategies and programs, to support the rapid development of new apprenticeship programs and/or the significant expansion of existing programs, to support the development and recruitment of a diverse pipeline of apprentices, and to build state capacity to make it easier for businesses to start apprenticeship programs and for apprentices to access opportunities. The Illinois Workforce Innovation Board Apprenticeship Committee identified that the support for apprenticeship intermediaries and regional navigators are the best investment to build the foundation for Apprenticeship Illinois to expand apprenticeships. Apprenticeship navigators and intermediaries help to ease the burden on employers and expedite the expansion of apprenticeship programs throughout the state and within more industries and occupations. They make it easier for the employers to adopt the apprenticeship model as a workforce strategy and for individuals to start or progress in a career through an earn and learn program. We are confident that this training will help to build a consistent message and facilitate the navigators and intermediaries in each economic development region to meet the workforce goals of Illinois. So Jennifer, or I should say Dr. Jennifer Foyle, please add any insight, given that you have facilitated the committee in its efforts from the beginning.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. Yes, like Patrick said, we started in 2016. What Morgan and Jim did not say is they are also members of the committee as well. They've been there from the beginning, or Morgan almost from the beginning. The work groups that he mentioned that you can also see on the screen, the systems and supports, the marketing and outreach, youth and pre-apprenticeships, that's how we get our work done. And if you all are interested in joining any of those work groups, please reach out to us. And the people who are presenting today, Morgan, Paul, Jim, Manny, they are all co-chairs of these work groups. And that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you, Jennifer, for providing that additional information. And I would love to work with all of you on the call if you're interested in joining the Systems and Support Work Group along with Jim, who's the co-chair, and Manny and Paul also work with that group as well. But today we're here to learn what an apprenticeship program is. Apprenticeship is a term that is used somewhat informally in a lot of workforce development circles, but in reality, apprenticeship has a specific definition as outlined by the United States Department of Labor. So according to the US Department of Labor, there are 5 core components of apprenticeship, and they are employer involvement, structured on-the-job learning, related training and instruction, rewards for skill gain, and a nationally recognized credential. So to break that down a little bit more, employer involvement essentially means that you can't have an apprenticeship without employers. Apprenticeship is an employer-driven strategy, and the business that is sponsoring or hosting an apprenticeship provides input and guidance on how to build out a program to best meet their business needs. Structured on-the-job learning essentially is one of the benefits of apprenticeship because it allows apprentices to receive hands-on experience in a particular occupation. Related training and instruction is essentially a complement to structured on-the-job learning, where an apprentice can receive some kind of academic theory behind the skills that they're learning on the job. And a related technical training and instruction can be in a classroom setting, but it can also be at the employer's work site. It can be online. There's really a lot of flexibility in how that training and instruction is provided. Rewards for skills gain is just that. As an employer, or excuse me, as an apprentice gains competency in their occupation, they receive more money to recognize their increasing mastery in their job. And then lastly, at the end of an apprenticeship program, apprentices receive a nationally recognized credential from the Department of Labor to confirm that they have met the standards of mastery of a particular job, so that they can show that they are eligible to begin an apprenticeship in any occupation, or excuse me, in any employer. Next slide. So an apprenticeship can be flexible. It really is dependent on the needs of the business, given that an apprenticeship is an employer-driven strategy. So some of the ways that an apprenticeship can be flexible is just in how you structure the combination of on-the-job learning and related training and instruction. The first way is a traditional model of an apprenticeship, where the apprentice can receive on-the-job learning experience as well as related technical instruction, a combination throughout the duration of their experience as an apprentice. Front-loaded means that an apprentice can get most of their related training and instruction at the beginning of their apprenticeship program before they start working on the job. And then segmented just means that, where an apprentice can receive alternating related training and instruction with on-the-job experience. Another way that apprenticeship can be flexible is in how an employer determines when an apprentice can meet and go up to the next level of their job. So time-based just essentially means that an apprentice has to spend a certain amount of time on the job or in the classroom before they can progress into that next level. Competency-based means that an apprentice can demonstrate mastery in a certain skill, regardless of how long they've been on the job, before they progress to the next level. And then a hybrid is just that. It's a blend between time-based and competency-based. And really, the U.S. Department of Labor is moving towards a hybrid model for most of the occupations that they oversee. So regardless of what kind of model an employer decides to use for a registered apprenticeship program, a registered apprenticeship is essentially just one of several different kinds of apprenticeship models that fall under the larger umbrella of Apprenticeship Illinois. So Apprenticeship Illinois, as you can see on the screen, has 4 different kinds of apprenticeship opportunities. They are registered apprenticeship, which we just talked about as being dictated by the United States Department of Labor. There's non-registered apprenticeship, which, as the name implies, just means that an apprenticeship program is not registered with the Department of Labor, and that there's not an overseeing body that can determine that an apprenticeship program meets quality standards. And then there's kind of a blend between non-registered apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship, which is called the Industry Recognized Apprenticeship Programs, or IWRAP, which is a relatively or extremely new, actually, model of apprenticeship where a company can go to what's called an SRE, or Standards Recognition Entity, to determine that they're meeting a quality standard. Just to kind of revisit the idea of non-registered apprenticeship, there are plenty of quality non-registered apprenticeship programs in Illinois and throughout the country. There's just not an oversight body that necessarily says that they've met a certain standard of quality. Now, another kind of model of apprenticeship is pre-apprenticeship. So pre-apprenticeship essentially is a boot camp to help make sure that apprentices are ready for the standards of apprenticeship, because apprenticeships are very rigorous. They not only last anywhere between 1 to 6 years, but they also are, because the employer is paying the apprentice from day one, they have high expectations. And to make sure that people, particularly those who are young or have employment barriers, are ready for those high standards, there are opportunities like at Revolution Workshop, which my co-panelist Manny Rodriguez is the executive director of, where people can make sure that they are ready either for the literacy or numeracy challenges that can be expected in an apprenticeship program, or ready just in terms of just essential job readiness skills. And then essentially the youth apprenticeship is as the name implies, is an opportunity for young people in high school, usually juniors and seniors in high school, to gain experience in a particular occupation. They get paid just as apprentices do, but there's no kind of increase in rewards or money because it's not as long as a standard apprenticeship program. But it is, again, just an opportunity for youth to prepare for specific occupation.
Morgan, this is Jennifer Phillips. I realized that I skipped the what is apprenticeship slide. Did you want to, I'm so sorry, do you want to go back and do that one?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. So this is just a slide that provides a little bit more detail about the 5 components of a registered apprenticeship program. So as you can see, one of the components of the registered apprenticeship program is the on-the-job learning. And so on-the-job learning, typically, according to the Department of Labor, you need to have at least 2,000 hours per year of the duration of the apprenticeship program. There is some flexibility in that, again, according to the needs of the business, but 2,000 is seen as the minimum. Another kind of metric for an apprenticeship program is the 144 hours of related training and instruction. So this is, again, per year of an apprenticeship program. And if you add up the 2,000 hours and the 144 hours of related instruction, that essentially is about a full-time job, regardless of if it's a traditional model or a front-loaded or segmented model of apprenticeship. It usually equals out to about a full-time job per year. Another thing, kind of specification around the metrics or the components of apprenticeship is that the employer gets to determine when and how an apprentice moves up to the next level. So, you know, they can use, again, the competency-based skill or the competency test to determine if an apprentice is ready to move on to the next skill. They can base it on time in the program. But the apprentice, or excuse me, the employer also gets to determine the increase in wages. So they can set how much an apprentice receives once they move up to the next level of their occupation. And then, as I mentioned a little bit ago, an apprenticeship can last anywhere between 1 to 6 years. It really all depends on the complexity of the occupation that an apprenticeship program is focused on. But, you know, regardless of the type of apprenticeship program, whether it's a registered apprenticeship program or non-registered, the idea of apprenticeship falls into this larger concept of career pathways. And so career pathways is essentially a combination of work experience and training as well as academic experience and training in a specific sector. And so work-based learning is a great way to help make sure people are connected to career pathways. But as you can see from this image on the bottom of the slide, the work-based learning apprenticeship falls at the very end of the scale of work-based learning experiences in terms of the intensity of employer engagement and really the commitment level from the apprentices themselves. And so when we're talking to employers or reaching out to employers and encouraging them to start an apprenticeship program, also keep in mind that this is a big commitment for them and that they might begin to explore how they can support work-based learning programs through opportunities that are a little bit less rigorous, like maybe an internship that builds into a youth apprenticeship and then lastly into an apprenticeship program. If you want more information about this, the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary is a great resource to understand further about the concept of career pathways and how apprenticeship falls into that. And then this slide, you know, I won't go too deeply into what this slide shows you. I think we'll get this as a handout after the webinar, but essentially the slide shows you the different models of apprenticeship, whether it's pre-apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, registered or non-registered, and how they differ from one another in some of those key components like on-the-job learning hours required, what the related instruction looks like, who best fits into these different models in terms of the eligible populations, and what kind of credentials are awarded. So I encourage you all to refer to this and see how the different programs under Apprenticeship Illinois differ. But I think now we will transition into the next slide about benefits of apprenticeship.
And good morning again, everyone. This is Jim Nelson at the IMA. When we look at the benefits of apprenticeship, first and foremost, it really does help improve recruitment and helps employers develop a highly skilled workforce. And as Morgan had mentioned, pre-screening applicants as to their readiness for apprenticeship is absolutely critical, and in the long run will benefit your program, whether you're a navigator or an intermediary. We want people to be referred as candidates for apprenticeship to an employer who are ready to take the coursework that's necessary through the related technical instruction. And we want people who are likely to be successful. That way we have some assurance that that employer is going to come back to us for additional apprentices after their first experience. Now, apprenticeship not only trains new workers for highly technical occupations, but it can also be used to upgrade the skills of current employees. It's not unusual for someone who is a machine operator, for example, to enter an apprenticeship to become a CNC programmer or a Industry 4.0 technician or a robotics technician. Apprenticeship really does lend itself because of that flexibility in on-the-job learning that's aligned to related technical instruction. Newly hired apprentices receive a paycheck based on training from the very first day. And the rule of thumb here is critically important. If there's no employer sponsoring that apprentice, there's no apprenticeship. It's very plain and simple. So pay raises incrementally as knowledge and skills increase. And that's kind of the incentive for the apprentice to continue to give their time and their effort over a longer period of time than the normal training program would provide. And it also provides employers with opportunities for tax credit, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So in building a pipeline of work of highly qualified workers, employers are really worried about their aging workforce. It's the #1 challenge facing manufacturing today. 10 years ago, it was rising healthcare costs. Now it's resourcing talent. This is going to be a continuing challenge as the baby boomers continue to retire through the end of 2030. So we still have another 10 years to go in the tsunami of retiring of the baby boom generation. On top of that, the boomers did not produce the same number of children that our parents did. And so by 2025, the actual labor force in Illinois will actually decrease by more than 330,000 individuals. So the competition for talent is going to increase even more. This really drives hard decisions by employers as to how they're going to train that workforce when the pool of talent with existing skills and knowledge is becoming smaller and smaller. So when we gain workers with customized skills, we start every apprenticeship with the foundational skills that apply across the industry, whether or not you're an ABC company or XYZ company. Once those skills have been developed, then the company can add in layers of specific processes and procedures that are unique to their company and their products. And that is what gives them that competitive edge over their competitors. So, another big concern of employers is retention. We have found nationally that 94% of apprentices continue employment with that company after completing the apprenticeship. And in fact, many apprenticeships build in an additional 2 or 3 years of continued employment so that the company can recover more of its initial investment. There's a hook for the apprentice that if they leave early, that they would owe their sponsoring company something of value in return for being able to leave early. Survey of businesses with apprenticeships find that 97% would recommend apprenticeship to others. And in the case of many of you have heard of the ICAT apprenticeship program, fully 2/3 come back for seconds, thirds, and we even have companies now that are on their fourth cohort of registered apprenticeship. So there are tools out there that are available that individual companies can can look at to calculate what their return on investment is, the way they're doing things, and through a registered apprenticeship. And some of those can be found through the DOL apprenticeship website. And I know that the state of Oregon developed a very good product along those lines too. So, saving money on wages. Most companies, when you look at it, bring in a new person at what they call their starting wage, which is usually $2 to $5 lower than what they pay somebody who they now consider a full-time employee. Training wages are allowed in apprenticeships and are usually $1 or $2 above minimum wage. That way, the employer can filter out some less qualified individuals and get those folks into pre-apprenticeship programs to tune up their knowledge and skills before they start a full-on apprenticeship. But again, as Morgan had indicated, as individuals learn and are able to demonstrate applied learning to skills, then the employer would increase the wages of that person until the end of the apprenticeship, where they would be on par with others similarly situated in that particular role in the company. All in all, right now, depending on whether or not the company pays for the related technical instruction or not, the average cost all in for an apprenticeship, including tuition, runs around $30,000 a year. But I would make sure that we understand that that's what employers are already spending, if not more, on the way that they're acquiring and training new talent. Next slide, please. So we mentioned earlier that there is a tax credit available for apprenticeship education. In 2019, Senate Bill 1591 was unanimously passed by the Illinois General Assembly and signed into law by Governor J.B. Pritzker, that offered an incentive to reward employers with skin in the game. And what the basic bill says is that if you have a registered apprentice who is age 16 or over and is an Illinois resident and is taking related technical instruction for which the employer is paying the tuition, paying the fees, paying the laboratory fees, that employer may receive up to $3,500 in a tax credit for each apprentice each year. So if it's one apprentice, it could be $3,500. If it's 10 apprentices, it could be $35,000. If it's somebody like Ford Motor Company, where they have hundreds, well, it adds up pretty quickly. In addition, there's a kicker that if either the apprentice or the company are located in an underserved area, and that's defined under the EDGE tax credit law, that employer can receive an additional $1,500 per apprentice per year, for a total of $5,000 per apprentice per year. So it's a very generous tax credit that the General Assembly has now said, this is our skin in the game. We are going to make this a reward-based incentive for employers to go down this route and engage in really upskilling the labor force in Illinois. Next slide, please. So I kind of went through most of this before. There is a URL. The tax credit took effect on January 1, 2020. So expenditures that are made beginning in January, so expenditures that were made for the fall semester of the 1920 academic year, those fall expenditures would not qualify. But for the spring semester that began in January, those expenditures and expenditures for the upcoming fall semester will apply to the income tax filing that is made next April by the employer. So it's always the year of expenditure is taken as a credit the following year. There isn't a step back for that fall semester in 19. I just want to make that clear. And then you see some of the other things there that are applicable, including the website that really goes into a little more detail than we have time for here. So I will turn this over and we'll talk about intermediaries and navigators.
Okay, why intermediaries and navigators? When we approached this work, we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. We did a lot of research and we looked around the country at who was doing this well. And what we found is that a number of states had employed a strategy utilizing intermediaries and navigators. And they were having a lot of success in using that structure. Next slide. So the problem, the issue, so to speak, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in expanding apprenticeships. There are a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, a lot of training providers, community-based organizations. When you look at the landscape of workforce players that are involved in standing up apprenticeships, you can quickly see that it's a very disconnected group that has a bit of an overwhelming sense of, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to get the information. And so using the structure of intermediaries and navigators is a solution to try to organize that information and get the right information in the right people's hands at the right time. Next slide. So there's a number of players, regional workforce needs, both present and future, that need to be satisfied. There's employers, youth, parents, and counselors. There are career pathways that have been established and programs that are out there, be they credit programs at community colleges or specific programs that are run by workforce organizations or community-based organizations. There's work-based learning that's happening, internships, apprenticeships. Then there's a lot of work-based learning that happens in the context of credit-based education, practicums and clinicals. There's a lot of on-the-job training and mentoring that is happening at companies. And there are a fair number of training providers, both secondary and post-secondary schools, as well as organizations. Some of the apprenticeships that we are working with, companies are actually providing the training. There are credentials. There are a lot of certifications that are industry recognized certifications that are important in all of this, and standards and quality and support. WIOA is one set of supports that's available, but there's a lot of grants that are also available through the Department of Labor, and some of those grants are passed through states or organizations like the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. There's a lot of resources that are available. We are targeting populations in underserved communities to make sure that they're not left out of this. And we need to have supportive services so that these individuals can be successful in the apprenticeship work. So there are organizations, not quite yet. So there are organizations out there that are really aimed at supporting apprentices through case management, through mentoring, and through other soft skills development coursework. So there's a lot of information and there's some knowledge. And the challenge is, and if you look at the way the diagram is set up, we really need to connect the dots. And it's not like this pretty picture of everybody's kind of moving in the same direction. It's really, there are a lot of providers out there who have great content and great capabilities, but they have to be organized in a way so that they can be connected with the right organizations to stand up these programs. Next slide.
So thanks, Paul. And this is Manny again with Revolution Workshop. And so that is why we decided as an apprenticeship committee, and we were developing this framework to come up with very specific roles to address this challenge of getting all of the dots connected and flowing in the right direction. The first role that we identified that we needed right off the bat was a regional apprenticeship and workforce consultant, or what we're calling the Navigator. It's important to realize that the Navigator is not the implementer. The Navigator is kind of the subject matter expert for that particular region. The Navigator should have already existing data, existing relationships, or if they're not having existing, they should be proactively seeking to develop relationships and partnerships with not only the business community, but also with community-based organizations, community colleges, and other training providers, and any organization that supports apprentices or pre-apprentices along the pipe. This person or this entity should also have a firm grasp of funding opportunities. And the reason why is that they're going to be guiding any of these, whether it's individual employers or intermediaries, they'll be guiding them through the process of creating an apprenticeship. And oftentimes that comes with some funding that can be leveraged to create that role or that apprenticeship. Again, it's flexible. You know, the Navigator could help a one-off employer go to the DOL Office of Apprenticeship and link them up and kind of, you know, walk away once they make that connection. They could be working with a company and sending them to an intermediary that services in their region, or some combo of both. They may be looking at walking them through a process of what really makes sense for their particular need. Role B really was created in apprenticeship intermediaries. Think of them as like the quarterback of the apprenticeship, quarterback of the implementation. There's a lot. We created this system mainly to address the need of small and medium-sized businesses that lack this, you know, the resources or the HR capability to run an apprenticeship program internally on their own. And what we were finding is, especially when you look at specific sectors, there are clusters that could be combined together where the training is oftentimes very similar, at least at the baseline level. And an intermediary, this could be a trade association, this could be a community training provider or community college, this could be an employer. These individuals are responsible for kind of putting all the pieces of an apprenticeship pipeline that we had shown you in an earlier slide together. So I serve a pre-apprenticeship, I serve in the pre-apprenticeship space. So I would be one spoke in a wheel with a construction intermediary. And then there would be employers, there's gonna be training. For me, I serve both union and non-union. So on the union pathway, it's the building trades that are that training provider. They have to be at the table. And those contractors have to be at the table. And that's all. Then there just has to be somebody that's trying to work with me to try to get my pre-apprentices and graduates into the apprenticeship pathway with those employers and with those training providers. And that intermediary is often the person that's doing most of the legwork, most of the administrative backbone work. You know, if there's funding assigned to it, they're usually the grant holder, and then they're dispersing the grant activities through sub-grantee relationships. And they're working with the other partners in that spoke in that wheel to make sure that it's as seamless as possible and that they're addressing all of the gaps and barriers to having successful apprenticeship programming within their particular area of expertise. Navigators are, I want to also point this out, navigators are very regional. They're meant to be in regional approach, not sector approach, sector driven. Intermediaries are sector driven. It has to be, because you're not going to get, you know, somebody as an electrician, a carpenter. They have very different, you know, those contractors have very different needs. And so you have to be sector specific. You have to be almost, you know, micro sector specific on some of the sectors to be able to grab all the employers, agree on the related technical instruction and the framework of how you're going to set up your apprenticeship. So that's a very key piece. And then role C is the one-offs. I think of this, we already have a lot of employers that work with the DOL direct, or they run their own training program that is just non-registered. They run their own apprenticeship program in their facility. They just don't register it with the DOL. But there's related coursework, there's on-the-job training, demonstration of hands-on competencies, and then there's a progression along a pathway that comes with promotion and wage increases. Those one-offs, again, that tends to be your mid-sized to larger companies, because again, they have the sophistication and the resources internally to effectively manage an internal apprenticeship program. Next slide. So how this all kind of works in this environment in Apprenticeship Illinois expansion, obviously at the top we have the WIB, the Workforce Innovation Board, which is the governor appoints the members of that board, and they set the overall workforce policy for the state of Illinois. The Apprenticeship Committee, which obviously me and my colleagues all serve on, is a subset of that board. And so we report back to that board, and we are broken out into the 3 work groups that we went into earlier. DCEO is kind of the government administration arm of this. And so they then take the recommendations that are formed through the committee and through the board, the WIB, and they actually put it into the NOFOs that you see and create all of the systems, back-end systems to administer funding disbursements and hold quality. And then that's obviously where we get the Apprenticeship Illinois. Apprenticeship expansion, which is specific to the grant opportunity and what we wanted to do. You see there's regional apprenticeship navigators, again, representing all 8 regions in Illinois. They're really out there to proactively find employers that are interested or educating employers on the benefits of apprenticeship. That is really the main goal of the navigator. And then again, the intermediaries on the other side, they're the major partner, major implementer, right? Coordinating, designing, managing, sponsoring. That is on that end. And then with the whole goal, again, the beneficiaries, there's 2 customer approach here, right? It's the business community. It's those businesses that have that need to upskill their workers. And that is the most important customer in this. But then it's also the folks that I serve, and any other potential apprentices that are, that's our other customer that we have to kind of take care of. And then you have all the supporting stakeholders. Again, there's a variety of different organizations, nonprofits, chambers of commerce, community-based organizations, school districts, unions. All of these play a role in promoting and advancing apprenticeship, and they support those 2 customers on the other end in various ways. And so this is kind of how the whole market works. Next slide. These next 2 slides are going to be similar to how Morgan had hers. This will be a handout that you'll receive separate that kind of really breaks down nitty-gritty down to the detail of what a navigator and an intermediary and what their specific role should be. Again, I want to point out the navigator is not the implementer. They're not responsible for implementing apprenticeship. They're not responsible they're there to market, encourage, and consult potential apprenticeship programming. The intermediary is there, again, to bundle the needs of the small and mid-sized businesses, ensure everybody is on the same page, that all supporting parties know their role and know what they're responsible for, and then they manage the overall program. And so that's kind of, again, the intermediary, thinking of them as the implementer, and the navigator more as the consultant. And so that's, these next two slides really get into the nitty-gritty, but for the sake of time, we're gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass it on to Jim for our next slide.
Hey, Manny, can I just add one thing? I think it's also important to understand that there is some overlap in these roles, and that there are some things that both of them do, and you'll see that as you read through this. But I think Manny's point, navigators are really, the support structure and help people get started, whereas the intermediaries are more the doers. But both navigators and intermediaries, it's important that they are connected to a set of folks who are doing this work, such that they have the latest information about resources and grants and other funding supports, as well as the best set of examples of how a particular apprenticeship is implemented. Just wanted to share that.
Paul, let me add one more thing. This is Patrick. And I would say that in addition to that, with the navigators, we get wrapped up in boundaries and territorial lines, etc. So I also want to say that it is important that navigators also cross over and take a look at what's happening in the surrounding areas to them, that they're well-versed in other opportunities throughout the state, throughout the United States, so that they can make these important connections for the intermediaries, the participants, and the employers within their individual area.
You guys done? Okay. As with any new program, particularly one that we're expanding in Illinois, over the years since the Fitzgerald Act was first enacted in 1934, a number of myths have arisen. And we wanted to take some time this morning as a group to kind of break through these myths and share with you what we've learned, what has been explained to us that we can verify. And so we want to break down these myths. The first one, of course, only unions or community colleges or Caterpillar can be sponsors of apprenticeship. And it's simply not true. In addition to what's written here on this slide, you need to understand that actually the opposite is true. Apprenticeships help level the playing field when employers of all sizes are competing for talent. And building retention strategies into the program from the very beginning really helps assure retention for 2, 3, 4 years after the conclusion of the apprenticeship itself. It should be part of that signed agreement between the employer and the apprentice, so that each party knows what's expected from the other. This really helps stabilize workforce development efforts, whether you're a company with 5 guys working in a large garage, or you're a company like Ford with 3 shifts and tens of thousands of employees. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, myth. Registering an apprenticeship program is too bureaucratic, extensive, and difficult. And I would tell you that that is absolutely not true. Right now, as we speak, there are literally hundreds, and I'd say by now a couple thousand of existing apprenticeshable occupations. These have already been vetted by industry, and they exist in a Dropbox that the Department of Labor is managing. There is a link here in the slide, and I'm sure this will be included with information that's being sent out to that Dropbox. And when you look at that Dropbox, I think there's probably a little over 1,600 different apprenticeships, and what they have is what's called the work process schedule, which is one of the documents that's required. It's Appendix A. It's one of the documents that's required to set up a registered apprenticeship. And the idea is that you definitely would start with this notion that if you can find an apprenticeship in that particular database, that's at least 75% of what you need to do, then you can customize the remaining 25% of that to fit your needs. If it doesn't exist, and you're not able to find one that's close, then you can certainly go about the business of creating a new, using an ONET code that's probably existing, and creating a new occupation and apprenticeship work process schedule. The other thing I would point to outside of the Department of Labor Dropbox is that the Urban Institute has also created a website and a depository of competency-based frameworks. And so these competency-based frameworks cover a number of sectors and a number of occupations and have detailed work process schedules and some information also about related technical instruction. I don't know if we've covered this notion of the difference between competency-based and an hours-based, more of a traditional apprenticeship. But a competency-based is really so that the on-the-job training and learning is not tied to a number of hours, because there may be some previous experience that comes into play, but it's tied to a specific competency that the employer is able to validate that the apprentice has attained. So it's a little bit of a different approach, but the competency-based apprenticeships is something that is definitely trending, and we will also get you the link to the Urban Institute, I see it's coming up now, competency-based occupational framework for registered apprentices. Thank you for bringing that in real time.
Could I jump in on just this one piece here?
Absolutely.
Building the on-the-job learning component, that training plan that's going to be used at the company is critically important to maintain alignment between classroom and on-the-job application. If there isn't a training plan for the company, you're going to run into the situation where you don't really have a true apprenticeship which blends those two components together.
Great point.
So another myth is that apprenticeships and internships are basically the same thing. I talked about a little bit ago how apprenticeship is sometimes a word that's used pretty casually and sometimes interchangeably with the idea of an internship. And while internships and apprenticeship both have hands-on experience, apprenticeships really are more tailored to a specific occupation, whereas internships are more generalized to getting career experience. Apprenticeships also are longer in duration. So apprenticeship, depending on the occupation, can last anywhere between 1 to 4 years, whereas an internship is usually semester-based, but regardless if it's semester-based or not, it's shorter term than apprenticeship. Apprenticeships are also always paid, as the Department of Labor specifies, but an internship can be paid or unpaid or just strictly for credit. Lastly, an apprenticeship is expected to lead to continuous employment and career growth. So an apprentice is essentially an employee of the employer from day one, whereas an internship can lead to a permanent position, but doesn't necessarily have to. The next myth on the following slide is that all apprenticeship programs take 4 years to complete and that it's one size fits all. Of course, that's not true. We've talked a lot about how apprenticeships can be very flexible and it's determined by the needs of the employer. So Paul mentioned that there are time-based apprenticeships, they're competency-based or hybrid model. Again, it really just is determined by what the business needs. We can make apprenticeships more flexible, even if they are registered by the Department of Labor. So there is that kind of 25% flexibility that you can use to help make sure that the apprenticeship is tailored to the needs of the business. You can get credit for previous experience for the apprentices, so that can shorten the duration of the apprenticeship if they are able to meet the competencies of a given occupation. And we've talked a little bit before about how both the length of the delivery of training and education can be tailored to the business, or just kind of the structure of the program itself, whether you front load the related technical instruction or have it segmented throughout the duration of apprenticeship.
So another myth, apprenticeships are only for young people or recruiting new staff. It doesn't apply to current employees. This also is just not true. You know, in fact, they're open to all age groups and it can be extremely beneficial for anybody along the career pathway and continuum. In fact, I know a lot of employers that like to hire folks on to entry-level positions within their company to kind of trial run, you know, work ethic and fit first before they kind of dive in the deep end with investing in that particular employee through an apprenticeship, because it is expensive. It is a commitment, I'll say that. So most of the time, you know, it's a great model for upskilling current employees, especially those that, you know, may be doing very entry-level work. You see something in that individual and you want to invest in them and bring them up. Also, just with tech changes, technology changes, oftentimes you're needing to upskill your current employees and workforce, and there's different positions now that are being created because of tech. And those can be apprenticeable and could be a great model for those types of opportunities within companies.
So this one's kind of my favorite because there's a lot going on here. The myth is that apprenticeships are costly. And if I collaborate with other companies on an apprenticeship program, my employees may go to one of those companies. Not exactly true. Is there a cost associated with registered apprenticeship? Of course there is. And part of it goes to wages, part of it goes to tuition, part of it goes to benefits, things like that. But you are getting, the employer is getting a return on that investment over time, with resulting with the apprentice becoming the skilled worker that they can use and use over a long period of time throughout a career. Now, multiple studies have shown more than 90% of workers who completed registered apprenticeship remain employed with that company for a long period of time. And that investment also leads to higher productivity, lower turnover, less recruitment costs, etc. This next point, though, is really the point I want to drive home here. The risk of doing nothing is far greater than possibly losing a skilled worker. Look, poaching is going to continue no matter what we do. But the more employers that start using apprenticeship, the fewer employees will be looking to poach employees from other companies. They will have had the opportunity to create the ideal worker for their own company without having to go across the street and offer somebody $1 an hour more to cross the street. So while poaching will probably continue, I think it'll continue at a much, much slower rate. Offsetting costs are tax credits. We now have the apprenticeship tax credit for here in Illinois. We know that the federal government, the House Ways and Means Committee, has been looking at a couple of different proposals over the last couple of years to establish a federal tax credit in addition to the state tax credit. So other resources can be available to help offset the cost of training. Some local workforce agencies have talked about providing some on-the-job training funds that can last up to 6 months and pay up to 50% of approved wages. So there are things out there that can be applied. Of course, with OJT funding, we're talking about WIOA eligibles, and we need to be carefully screen folks, again, to make sure that they're ready to take on a full-on apprenticeship. So, are they costly? Yeah, but employers are already paying this, if not more, under the current practices they use for recruiting new talent. And apprenticeships can stabilize budgeting for those companies, and it gives a better long-term view of human capital needs for the company. One of the IMA member companies, one of the presidents of the companies, when I asked him if he minded spending so much on his apprentices, said, look, I got asked one time, why should I spend all this money to train my employees when they're going to leave? And I looked him in the eye and I said, well, what if I don't train them and they stay? Training leads to higher productivity, lower turnover, less recruitment costs. The myth is busted.
Jim, I want to just jump in and just say this too on this point, because I can't emphasize what Jim just said enough. I can tell you, in running pre-apprenticeship programs, those companies that take the time to invest in their employees and train them, and those individuals feel that, right? They feel that the company is making an investment in them. That builds loyalty. And I've seen it time and time again. We've run studies on it. Our folks have turned down more lucrative per hour wages because they realize the benefit of this employer, of an employer investing into their training. So I just wanted to really highlight that home, because this is a big, big myth.
Thanks.
Okay, the next myth. Becoming an apprentice means choosing between work and college. And I would say this is definitely not true. Many apprentices earn 2-year associate's degrees during their apprenticeship. We have a whole lot of examples at city colleges where our apprentices are going through an associate's degree program at the same time that they're working as apprentices. And I would say even on the 4-year degree side, that there are several examples of companies that have organized 4-year college fairs for their apprentices once they've completed the apprenticeship and their associate's degree, to look at programs that would complement the experience that or complement the area of study that they're working in, and that the apprenticeship and their associate's degree was connected to, in order to help those students find an appropriate part-time opportunity that they could then use tuition reimbursement to complete their 4-year degree. So I know there's several companies out there that are very interested in continuing to upskill their employees. And so first point is that a lot of these programs are associated with an associate's degree. And then second point is employers are able to leverage, or employees, once they complete an apprenticeship program, are able to leverage tuition reimbursement to pursue their 4-year degree, bachelor's degrees.
Okay, here's another one that I enjoy. Apprenticeship programs aren't worth the investment. There's a perception among managers that taking on an apprentice will burden senior level employers who will spend time on coaching rather than other tasks. Mentoring is a critical component of the on-the-job learning plan, and identifying an individual who is primarily responsible as the mentor assures that the company training plan is followed and that the skills are learned and competency is achieved. Mentoring apprentices, however, can be a shared task among multiple employees, although there should be, again, one lead. Shared mentors also assures that a greater amount of institutional knowledge is passed along to the new workers. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. So when we're talking about mentors with potential companies, don't talk about a single person. Talk about it as a shared responsibility across different people, different departments, different processes within the confines of that particular company or manufacturer. Related technical instruction can also be configured to help companies transition to new technologies or new products lines, and even moving to Industry 4.0 platforms. So when we're talking about taking this on as a cohesive, holistic approach to workforce development, it's obvious that these are well worth the investment because it helps move the entire company along and keeps them competitive in the overall industry.
All right, next myth. Designing an effective apprenticeship program requires too much legwork. That's not true at all either. One of the things that I need to make sure that I emphasize here is that we are really getting to a point now where there is enough examples and enough programs that are existing across the country that you really are not, it's really not necessary to create these programs from scratch. There's literally somebody doing something in every sector. And so, you know, businesses are not alone. You can leverage the Navigator and Intermediary roles to play a key part in connecting you to those programs that are existing in other places. I find that when I become aware of a program, when I reach out, people are more than happy to share the documentation and the work that they've done. And we're all gaining capability and gaining apprenticeship expansion through these efforts. We definitely want to build on what's already in place. Navigators and intermediaries are a tool to help you do that, to get through the registration process, to make sure that you're taking advantage of financial resources and tax credits. And there's a number of grants that are out there, as I said earlier, as well. The other thing I think that's important to note here is that sponsorship of a registered apprenticeship program doesn't necessarily have to lie with the company. I think that's something that's been trending lately, is that intermediaries, just like City Colleges of Chicago, are now taking on the sponsorship of registered Department of Labor programs. So what does that mean? That means that we work with the employers, because the employers are employer involvement is the #1 key component to setting up an apprenticeship. We work with the employers to develop the work process schedules, which include the on-the-job training and learning and the related technical instruction. But then we assemble the paperwork, we do the back and forth with the Department of Labor and get those programs approved and up and running. And that can save some time and take some burdens away from the employers, especially if you're an employer that would just sponsor a couple of apprentices. Then that administrative burden is offset by an intermediary like City Colleges. There's a lot of information at the www.apprenticeship-illinois website, so please be sure and check that out. There's existing infrastructure as well as a host of other information and links to take you to other resources. So please use that in your quest to develop an apprenticeship program.
And then our last myth, stellar apprentices are few and far between. Obviously, where I sit, running a pre-apprenticeship program in construction for underserved communities and underrepresented communities in the construction sector, I totally don't co-sign on this notion at all. I think sometimes employers just don't know where to find quality talent. And that is the purpose of why we created a system of navigators and intermediaries, so that there would be a resource, a connecting agency, if you will, that would, say, here's this need, here's this organization that fills this need, let me link them together. And a lot of this, we didn't even talk about equity and diversity, and that's something that's a very big component of this and why we wanted to create this system. But oftentimes this myth is what leads to furthering of the lack of diversity in these sectors, is that there's, let's be honest, stereotypes within certain communities and certain groups that they can or cannot do something. And we have to break that down. And the way you do that, I believe, is through a system of relationships where companies can be involved with organizations like mine, get to see what the program, get to tell us how to run our program, right? What do you need? And then I match that need. And then we work together to supporting that apprentice. That's how you really get an apprentice to stick. And that's how you really get, an apprentice to be successful and complete the apprenticeship, is then when there's a partnership and a collaboration among many different stakeholders to make sure that they're invested in that particular individual. And again, I think we have to continue to take down some of the self-imposed barriers that industry sometimes puts on itself based on older and outdated type of practices. We have to make sure, again, the only way that stuff starts to change is that you have relationship. And again, creating this intermediary framework, that is the whole point, is to create a relationship within the sector and that cluster of companies. The navigators, to be that broker, if you will, to be that subject matter expert about how, having that conversation with a business and saying, hey, have you thought about this? This strategy seems to work for a similar company in another region. Have you thought about this? And that's where you start to change some of these, again, some of the practices that lead to this myth even being in someone's head. And then I would just reemphasize the point that oftentimes employers tend to have their current employees go through an apprenticeship. So, that's just a myth on that end as well, because your current employees, you're going to be able to identify who you think is going to be a good fit within that. And if there is an opportunity that you have to look outside, then you can. But, that's the other piece, is that this model very much lends itself for, current employees. And in that instance, you can definitely find stellar employees within your company that could, definitely be successful in this apprenticeship model.
And I think that this particular myth again points up the need to make sure that candidates that you're going to refer to employers for potential hire are pre-screened to make sure that, one, they can enroll in the required courses with the RTI provider, probably a community college, or whether they need some fine tuning prior to that through either a pre-apprenticeship program or a remedial class on a short-term basis. Get that remedial help before the apprenticeship begins. Otherwise, the apprentice is going to feel lost, and it's just going to frustrate the employer and the apprentice as to why did we go down this pathway. Remember also to make sure that you believe that every candidate referred, you believe truly has a reasonable chance of success at completing the apprenticeship. And really the measure is going to be employer satisfaction. How many of those employers come back for seconds or thirds or fourth years of cohort? if they're not coming back, there's a reason. And it's equally as important to find out why they're not coming back as it is why they are coming back.
Yeah, I'd like to share a quote with you on this point as well. And that is that talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. I'll say it again. Talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. And I think that really kind of sums up a lot of what we've been talking about. I can point to a specific example of a large insurance company that went through, when they were thinking about apprenticeships and looking at what would the roles be, they looked at their job descriptions, and so many of them said that they required a bachelor's degree. And what they found is that if they looked at those job descriptions critically, that this work could be done with somebody who didn't necessarily even have a college degree, someone who was college ready but didn't have a degree. And they pointed those apprenticeship opportunities towards those roles. And what they found is that there was a whole nother set of talented people, a new pipeline of people who were stellar, who were engaged, who were very capable, but they never would have talked to them in their other processes because they weren't looking at that population. Right. And so again, I'll say it again, talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. And apprenticeship solves for that.
So I'm going to quickly just go through the Apprenticeship Illinois, and thank you, Paul, that's amazing. I wrote down that quote. Apprenticeship Illinois website. We bought up all of the Apprenticeship Illinois, Apprenticeship il.com, .net, .org, .gov, I think all of them, just so that if people can find this web page easily. Now it takes them though to an Illinois work page site, Illinois WorkNet site. But they can put in that URL, apprenticeshipillinois.com, and it will take them there. We are, just to let you know, we are updating this constantly, and by mid-July, hope to have it as robust as possible. Right now, what you see is 4 tiles ahead of you. Apprentices, we're gonna point them to intermediaries. Employers, we're gonna point them to navigators. And the intermediaries and navigators, could you click on that one? Right now, when you go there, and you click on one of them, it just gives you the definition of them. But in the navigators, like, let's click on that. Right now, you just see definitions, but we're going to have the faces of our navigators. Now, of course, the function of the navigator is more than just one person, but we're going to have that key point of contact in every region so people know who to contact. And with intermediaries, we're going to list not just the grantee intermediaries, any intermediary that we know of in the state and what programs they have. So people can come here and find out what programs are available and where they're at. If you could go back to the front, Jen, and click on resources. And this is what we're really working on. There's quite a few resources here, but click on resource library. This is where we're trying to curate for you guys all kinds of resources. So it's not complete yet, so I'll send you an email when we have everything completed, but there are a lot right now. So like if you clicked on creating an apprenticeship program, you're gonna find there's no reason for us to reinvent the wheel. There are so many great guides out there already, each with their own nuances, maybe geared toward manufacturing or construction or healthcare, but we're finding those guides for you and putting them here. And it's also when it comes to business engagement or working with local workforce areas or different things of that nature, if you go back one, Jen, yes, all those we're trying to find you some resources and available for you. And if you find resources that are awesome, let us know and we'll add to this because we can do that very easily. So I just wanted to end with that we will be putting up the training. So we're developing the training one course at a time. This is just one of the courses. It's going to go into a learning management system and you'll be able to access it through this website. And just be looking for an email there. And I think I want to open this up to questions and answers.
Jen, I have one more kind of comment that was discussed early on, and that was that given the baby boomers You know, a lot of senior folks are retiring or leaving the workforce, and creating a void for many manufacturers and a lot of employers. And we've talked about bringing the apprenticeship or the apprentices on, and how that can, you know, help with the supply end of this. But there's also the retention that Jim had mentioned, and that is of the new apprentice who are coming on, and retaining them based on the training and the data that we have. They tend to stay with the employer. But there's also the retention of mentors. And, you know, we know that mentors have a sense of ownership when they work with new apprentices that are coming on. They're sharing their ideas. They have a real connection with the actual apprentice. So we have to look at all opportunities that are out there to maintain the supply and maintain the folks that are currently at an employer. So that's another avenue to consider.
And I think with that, we should open it up to questions for anyone who has questions for our panelists. Anything that Jim or Paul or Morgan or Manny said that you want to dive a little deeper.
And this is Jennifer Phillips. At this point, if anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, this is Jennifer Foyle. I have a question for Jim Nelson. I've heard you say there's no magic bullet or something like that. Could you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah,
putting you on the spot.
Yeah, because I use that phrase for so many things. You know, I also usually say there's no secret sauce. Apprenticeships take hard work. I mean, that's the bottom line. When we look at use of apprenticeships since probably the late 1940s, right after World War II, apprenticeships fell by the wayside in many industries other than construction and building trades, electrical, plumbing, things like that. In fact, I can tell you that my grandfather learned auto body and auto mechanic through two apprenticeships in the 1920s. But, you know, since then, there's been 5 generations that have passed, and now we're running out there with, hey, apprenticeship is the next greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, it's going to take some, you know, bearing proof in the pudding, to use another analogy, that is going to prove to employers that this is a reasonable investment of their time, talent, and treasure to develop their workforce through a tried and true process. And that's simply not going to be that you open up one day and say, we're now offering an apprenticeship in these occupations, and there's going to be a line out the door. It doesn't work that way. You really have to work and beat the bushes and sit down and develop relationships, and then develop employers that are using your program and are satisfied with your program to act as ambassadors to entice other employers who have taken a wait and see attitude. That's what you're going to run into at the very beginning, is that wait and see attitude. Let's see what somebody else does and see how it works for them before I plunk down my dollars. Well, just stay with it. There's no magic bullet. I've been at this now for nearly 10 years, and you know, we're reaching 100 employers in the ICAP program now, but it's still, you know, one employer at a time and 1 to 5 apprentices at a time. So be patient and stick with it.
Thank you, Jim. Any other questions? And I'm sorry, it was the secret sauce is what I meant. And I think you can unmute yourself by doing *6, or you can do in the chat. Jen, could you go back to the system so we can, or, oh, it's just a Q&A. Any other questions? All right, well, with that said, thank you all for joining us. We're going to put this, for those who in your organization who are not able to make it, we're going to put this in the learning management system and make it available for them to watch. So we appreciate your time. Thank you, panelists, for your time as well. And I hope you all have a great day.
Yes, thank you all.